Hi there. I've got another reaction video for you. And this time, we're checking out JayzTwoCents' recent video of him trying out Linux. Let's jump into it.
As you can see, it's working. It's working flawlessly. Not because we needed new cables and stuff, but because we switched to Linux. So welcome to the very first Linux video I'm ever going to have made on this channel. I say ever going to have made because I might do some follow-ups to us trying out this box here that we built. But in all of the time that I have been doing YouTube, every of the time since August 26, 2012, I have never touched a Linux topic in my life. Why? Because you guys scare the shit out of me because you guys are some opinionated mother...
Okay, so, all right, well, just to be clear, every community has opinionated people and some people who are overly opinionated, but the Linux community is not that bad. I mean, there's a lot of times where people will talk about it in the sense of like toxicity or something. And that could be videos that our YouTubers make or podcasts that talk about it. But most of the time it's because they talk about it in a global sense of the community as like the Linux community as a whole. But that's a very gigantic, broad spectrum of different types of communities. There's not just one Linux community. It is a bunch of different communities combined together. And I feel like a lot of their experiences that are people who are feeling like toxic experience are localized to certain types of sections, and we'll call them hardcore sections. And not to pick on Arch Linux, but they don't have the greatest reputation. They're not known for being the friendliest bunch. Of course, there are a lot of people in that community who are great and are very friendly and welcoming, but I'd say Arch is more of a mix. One of the reasons beginners should avoid hardcore sections of the platform, in addition to it being rather difficult to use, is some of those sections are not welcoming to new users. With Arch, it's kind of a hit or miss, more often missing, but when it comes to welcoming aspects, it's not completely awful, but it's not the greatest either. There are other sections that are worse. I mean, much worse. There are even some that are brutal to beginners. That's why you never hear me talking about those sections in my content. Avoid the mud and your shoes don't get muddy. So I don't tell people about them, so you don't go to them and deal with it. And anyway, my channel is like 90% Linux focused. And if the community was that bad, I wouldn't have made a channel that was 90% Linux focused. Though to be fair, the parts that are bad are very, very loud. So I can understand why some people might get that vibe sometimes. But that's why we made our community. It's all about being helpful and kind and all that sort of stuff. So if you're interested, you can join by getting the links in the description for the Discord and the forum.
Yeah, how come you're not using Arch Linux?
The last time I touched a Linux kernel was Ubuntu back in like 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. It's been a long time. That was back when I worked in a software development office and I was bored. I had a laptop up and was messing around in that, but I never got serious about it. So,
well, that's actually kind of unfortunate because if the last time you tried it was back then, it's a very different experience then to now. And in fact, it was kind of an unfortunate time to have tried Linux back then because there was no Steam around that time. You couldn't play Steam games on Linux because Steam was not available for Linux, and you couldn't play that many games. There was actually probably like a few dozen. Now we have 20,000, so it's a lot different now. Well, so here's a brief Linux history lesson. Back then, around 2010 to 2011, there was some decisions made by the GNOME team where they decided to drop GNOME 2 for the GNOME 3 version. But GNOME 3 was nowhere close to being ready. They just decided to drop GNOME 2 anyway. So there was like this like kind of a purgatory of sorts time where about 2 or 3 years, GNOME 3 was just not usable and GNOME 2 had been abandoned. So if you tried Ubuntu around that period of time, you would be trying the Unity desktop that Ubuntu made as a compensation factor for the decision GNOME made. So it's very different period of time, because especially because he said 14 years, that's 2011, especially 2011, because that's when Unity was first launched. Like 11.04 was the first version of Unity as the main desktop, and it was not good. It got better later on. In fact, 12.04 was a really good release. So it only took them a year to get there. But 11.04 and 11.10 were not good releases. It was very buggy. So if that was the time he tried it, I could see why he did not have a great experience. But now it's very different. Very different. Although, by the way, if you're curious and you want some more Linux history content from me, then let me know in the comments.
Today's perspective is going to be a gaming system for Linux.
Okay.
Well, a gaming system built running Linux to kind of just see what it's like from a very beginner's perspective. Look, I am not versed in Linux. And what I'm going to ask of you guys, because I want to get aggressive with you down in the comments and start blocking people and stuff, you are going to probably have a different way to approach this. That's the thing with Linux being open source, is the fact that there is a bajillion different ways that you can do it. And yes, what is the old saying? You can tell the people that are running Arch because they'll tell you. Do you know how many of you told me you're running Arch in the comments of the video where we were running Bazzite? Anyway, that's what we're doing today. We're running Bazzite. It's very...
Okay, so that is kind of true. There is a meme of people who say that they use Arch all the time. And it became a meme. Originally, it was just like a joke people were saying on forums and Reddit and stuff like that. And then it became a meme that a lot of people say. And there's actually another question, because it's not really about whether they're running Arch. The real question here is, if someone is using Arch Linux and is a vegan and does CrossFit, which one do they tell you first? I mean, that's a paradox question right there. But anyway, Bazzite is actually really cool. It's definitely worth trying. If it's not, it's very different from traditional distributions, but if you are interested in checking out, I highly recommend it. Bazzite is very cool. And I plan to make a video about Bazzite in the future, so be sure to subscribe if you'd like more about that. But I think that if you're interested at all in trying out Bazzite, you should give it a shot. It's very good.
Very easy install process. You're up and running very fast. It was pretty flawless. In fact, that's what got our stuff working back there, even though I spent another $100 and something bucks on cables I didn't need to spend. This is the system I built for that. So what I actually wanted to say before I started to say I don't want to get aggressive in the comments, if you have what you think is a better approach for this, please respectfully put it down in the comments, but include some information that's actually useful, not why did you go with Bazzite and not yada yada, because guess what? That doesn't tell you anything. All that does is come off as a pedantic put down. So, if you're going to recommend a different distro of some sort, say, I recommend this distro because, and it has a user rating in terms of difficulty 1 to 10 of put a number. Now, keep in mind, if you're approaching people that are beginners, what might seem like a 5 difficulty to you might be a 10 to someone that's new. So try to put yourself back in perspective of being new. I know
Oops,
it's hard for a lot of you Linux folks, but bear with me. We're going to try this here today. So here's the system.
Wait, what? Okay, I accidentally paused it there. I didn't mean to the first time, but the second time I did it on purpose. But it's kind of interesting because he's preemptively calling out rudeness of a potential commenters while being a bit rude about it. I mean, like, let's just rewind that last part.
I know it's hard for a lot of you Linux folks, but bear with me. We're going to try this.
I know it's hard for a lot of you Linux folks. I'm just saying that comes off a little weird if you're trying to get people not to be aggressive or rude in the comments. Anyway, but the other point about level of difficulty, that is a good note. Some people don't put themselves in the role of the beginner when they're describing like the difficulty of things. So I agree with that. I've heard people say something as is easy when they're talking about installing Arch or Gentoo. Long conversation. I'm not going to go into details of how that happened, but others I've seen saying stuff like it's simple when they're talking about manually compiling something from source code and whatever. But my favorite, though, is when I hear someone say, it's so easy to do once you learn how, or something along those lines. Like, once you know how to do it, it's so easy to do. Yes, of course it is. Duh. If you know how to do something, it's very easy to do it. Anyway, that one makes me laugh because it's so ridiculous. Like, it's basically making fun of itself in the same sentence, but they don't get it. Anyway, I agree that having like a difficulty thing of putting yourself in the position of the beginner when you're talking about the difficulty thing, that's a very good point. So that part, yes. The other part, little weird, but anyway.
Here today. So here's the system that I built. It is running a 14700K and a Z790 ITX board from ASRock Phantom Gaming. Really because it's the only ITX board that I have. 32 gigabytes of DDR5 running 6400 mega transfers at CL38. Nothing super fast or crazy. It does have a 240 millimeter AIO that is cooling it. It's an old Fantex MPG or MPH240. We used to joke around, it's the miles per hour. It's got an 850 watt SFX power supply because we are also, for the GPU, running a 20 gigabyte 7900 XTX AMD card. And the reason for that is Linux support for AMD graphics cards tends to be better than NVIDIA, although NVIDIA does seem to be improving in terms of the graphics support, at least on Bazzite, because Phil actually went home after he did the wall. Phil set this up and set himself up a dual boot laptop that runs Bazzite as well, and he was playing Cyberpunk and other games and kind of doing some performance comparisons and stuff, and said everything appeared to be working. DLSS was working, ray tracing was working, like it was a pretty seamless experience. Like he also set it up on his desktop, which is an RTX 4080 with a 13700K, and that was another flawless experience for him. In fact, if you're just in there playing the game and you hand the controls to someone and they're playing, they would never know they're playing on Linux. That's how seamless it is.
Wow. Okay. So that's awesome to hear. I personally use AMD for the reason that NVIDIA has not been the best for Linux in this era. But fun fact, if you go back 10 years, NVIDIA was the best. But then Lisa Su took over AMD and crushed it. The Linux support got so good and AMD just took it over. They took over the crown of the best option for Linux GPUs. So when I bought my hardware a few years ago, it was the best option. But NVIDIA has been finally back on track with support for the last year or two, maybe a little more, but fairly recent because of some Wayland issues and NVIDIA trying to fight how things were done and whatever. But they finally gave in and started working with the community. So it is a lot better these days. And NVIDIA has been working a lot with various community members and stuff like that to improve. I mean, it's still proprietary software, but at least they're putting more effort into it. So that's fantastic. But it's also great to hear that the support with Bazzite is basically undetectable as being different. So that's pretty awesome, actually. So I love that. And I haven't had NVIDIA in so long that I have no reference point in terms of like how good the quality of support is. But based on the fact that I cover news all the time and I see the updates for the drivers and all that sort of stuff, I have seen there's been a lot of improvements by NVIDIA, so that's good.
Now, obviously, there's going to be limitations to what you can do with Linux. Now, in terms of desktop and software support, you got to look at the individual software you want to run to see if it has Linux installs and the level of support that's going to be supported for the OS. But like, for instance, OBS does have...
Well, I mean, yeah, that's true, but that's true for every operating system. Nothing can run everything. If someone switches to Windows from Mac or to Mac from Windows, there's going to be something that is not there. That's just how it is because it's a completely different operating system. It's completely different software, all that sort of stuff. I guess to be fair, that does happen a little more often than others with Linux because of the lower market share and all that sort of stuff. But not because Linux can't handle this stuff. It's not like it can't support any particular app, but instead because the app developers don't bother to support Linux. It's like a chicken or the egg problem. But with the rate that the Linux platform is growing, these days anyway, I think it's possible that we will start seeing more devs supporting Linux. And I am very excited about that. That is awesome because we hit a 5% US desktop market share. Why couldn't I say desktop? That's interesting. So desktop market share is at 5% now for the US market. And that is awesome because that's hitting a very important milestone. And the momentum is also super fast. That's 1% growth in a year. And that is crazy because there was a period of time where it was 8 years for 1%. So 1 year is awesome. And with all the YouTubers and the podcasters and everybody talking about Linux these days, and the fact that Linux is finally at a stage where it's fairly easy to use and fairly easy to set up and all that sort of stuff, I am very excited for the future of the platform.
If you want to do live streaming, does have a Linux install. This, like for instance, my Insta360 Link 2 camera that's got the gimbal and all that, does have a driver and stuff that works, but it's unknown yet because I haven't tried it, whether or not I'll get the software to run, which gives me the gimbal control. So it might turn the device into the most basic version of the device. So for instance, my RØDECaster 2.
Okay, well, first of all, the OBS thing, yes, OBS Studio works great for Linux. It has almost everything that the Windows version supports. But I will admit that sometimes there's a bit of a delay in some of the features. For example, multi-track video was available in version 31 for the Windows edition. And then with Linux, it got it in version 31.1. So there is sometimes a little bit of a delay. But almost all of the features are available in the Linux version. Not absolutely everything, but almost everything. So it just depends. However, that point about the Insta360 software, that might be a problem because there are some companies that support Linux only in the most basic way. That is true. I'm not sure if Insta360 is one of those, but Elgato is one of those where you can use the Elgato hardware. Like I have a Stream Deck and it works great, but it doesn't use the default like official software. You can't use the Stream Deck software from Elgato. You have to use an alternative, and it does work, but it's not the official supported thing. So there is that kind of thing.
Which we use in our podcast room. Yes, I know we haven't podcasted in forever. Hopefully this Friday. But anyway, I digress. It basically, the software itself won't run in Linux, which allows me to drag and drop like
the RØDECaster, yeah,
and pad samples and all that sort of stuff. However, everything else, it'll work as like a giant DAC at that point. And that's okay for Linux if I don't care about the sound pads and stuff and programming them, because everything we would need that to do is actually controlled on board the RØDECaster. So all of the mixer and all of the compressors and all that stuff is built in. It doesn't need the software to run. However, what we do use the software for is when we record the audio and offload that into the software, which then transcodes it into an MP3 for us that we upload to Buzzsprout to then syndicate it to all of the podcasting services. That is built into the software. So we would have to figure out a workaround for that. It's not impossible. It's just these are the kinds of things that you take on when you go into an open source OS like Linux or any of the million distros that are out there versus all the native Windows support. So,
okay, we'll get to that last part in a second. Let's talk about the RØDECaster Pro 2. So the RØDECaster Pro 2 is awesome. I use it myself, and I think it is fantastic. And all my productions are using Linux, using the RØDECaster. I love this device. It's kind of pricey, but it's definitely worth it. Now, Jay is right that the RØDECaster app by Rode is only for Windows and Mac, last I checked, which is lame. But RØDECaster, like he said, it can do pretty much everything directly on the device. So I'm pointing to my device. You can't see it because it's over here. But so it's a fantastic device, and it has a little touch screen at the very top, and you can change the different EQing of the microphones. You can choose different profiles. There's also some sliders to control like the volume and the gain and all sorts of stuff. And you can have different channels that are doing different features. And yes, there is the soundboard part. And it's kind of interesting because I haven't tried to customize the soundboard at all. So I never even bothered to because it's not really something I'm using the RØDECaster for. So I'm not sure if it's possible in Linux to do that, but I think I will try it out after this recording, and maybe in a future video, I'll talk about it, like maybe in a future podcast episode of Destination Linux or something like that. I'll talk about that. So subscribe and all that. But I do record audio in my RØDECaster, but I also do it through OBS. So one option for Jay is to just record it directly into the computer and skip the transfer thing. That way you don't have to worry about moving it from the device to the computer. You can just do that way. But I also do record on the SD card. So I have like an extra backup just in case there's some kind of audio issue. So what I do is just plug in the SD card into the laptop or the desktop and then just transfer that way. It's a little bit manual, so I get why Jay would want the full app because it does simplify some stuff. Like the only thing Jay mentioned that I don't have an answer for off the top of my head is the auto converting to MP3 and then uploading that. There's absolutely converter tools for Linux, but yeah, the automatically doing it inside of the RØDECaster app and simplifying all the process into one app, I get it. That is more convenient. So it's understandable to feel like there's something missing there. But at the same time, I think that it's not that big of a deal breaker for me and a lot of people. I mean, he's not even saying it's a deal breaker. It's just more of like, I feel like this is such a good product anyway. This one little caveat is not going to make me hate the product or anything. So, but I do want to replay something because I forgot exactly how he phrased it. But it's about the open source thing.
Impossible. It's just these are the kinds of things that you take on when you go into an open source OS like Linux or any of the million distros that are out there versus all the native Windows support. So,
okay, that's suggesting that open source is some kind of inferior thing. Like it's like saying that it's the open source is an identifier for something being inferior or something like that. So OBS is open source and Windows users love it. Blender is open source and a ton of people love it. VLC is open source. WordPress is open source and powers like 35% of every website. Signal is open source, the really cool secure chat app. Bitwarden, the password manager, is open source. And the list goes on and on. And plus, let's not forget that Linux is the most popular operating system on the planet in every other form of computing than desktop. I mean, there's that little asterisk there, but it is true. Linux powers 100% of all the top 500 supercomputers. And also the Linux powers like 80% of the internet. In fact, the majority of Microsoft's Azure service is powered by Linux. Yes, Microsoft's own cloud system is powered by Linux. It's also the kernel that powers Android and so much more. So to say that open source is like you're basically like giving up options or you're using something less so, I don't know. That just kind of struck me. Maybe that's not what he intended. Maybe that's not what Jay was intending to sound that way, what he was saying, but it kind of sounds like that. So, it's clearly not that, obviously. Open source is awesome. Not everything open source is great, but there's a lot of things that are great that are open source. So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with like you're accepting some kind of issue,
So kind of in a nutshell, for gaming, pretty good support, content creation. We'll give it a middle thumb depending on what you're trying to do. Like Adobe and all that really isn't going to work on Linux. However, DaVinci Resolve theoretically does. So we haven't tried it, but that's what we're reading.
Okay, so DaVinci Resolve does work on Linux for sure. No question. But it is kind of a pain for no real reason. Blackmagic Design decided to support Linux, but focusing like exclusively on the Red Hat family. So if you are running Ubuntu, there is an option, but you need to use a third-party project called Make Resolve Deb, I think, DEB. And then there's also the option for DaVinci Box. I recently found this. Someone told me in the Discord channel, the Discord server for tuxdigital.com/Discord. And basically it uses DistroBox and then does one built specifically for running DaVinci Resolve. It's not a simple download and install process like it is on Windows and Mac. So it is fair to say that it's, it's not the greatest option and greatest experience, which is annoying. Blackmagic Design, that is very annoying. Just make a Flatpak, please. Please. Okay. Or just make a distro box that you provide. I don't know. Something like that. Anyway, but Resolve does work on Linux and Resolve is pretty awesome. That's what I use. It's worth it. The stuff to deal with, it's worth it. Resolve is fantastic. So I don't really have that much to say about it. But Adobe Point, yes. If you want to use Adobe products, that's not really an option. There are alternatives to everything that Adobe makes, including the video editor like Resolve. But yeah, if you insist on Adobe products, that will be somewhat of a problem.
And then when it comes to like, there's a lot of other programs and stuff that just straight up aren't going to work on Linux at all. But fortunately, though,
I mean, that's true. Just like all the Mac apps don't necessarily work on Windows, and not all the Windows apps necessarily work on Mac. So I feel like people use this as like a thing against Linux when it's true for every operating system. If you move from one platform to another, there's going to be compensation issues. There's going to be things that you have to compromise on. You might not have every piece of software that you want, and that's true for all of them. And if someone starts with Linux and then moves to other things, that's still true. There are still things you can't run that are Linux specific that are not available in Windows. Like that's true on all of these things. So I feel like it's always presented in a way that Linux is the inferior not having thing. But really, it's everything. They all do that,
There's like OpenRGB and a lot of third-party support to actually be able to control like your RGB software and stuff. Or like Phil, for instance, has like the Razer Synapse stuff and other Razer devices and RGB devices that actually natively worked in Linux through a program called OpenRazer that works in Linux. So you're going to have...
Okay, so that's true. There are a lot of alternatives that implement things for Linux, even if the official devs don't care about it. But actually, that's one of the coolest things about Linux community is that you can, like when a company says to the Linux community or a Linux dev and says, this will not work. We're not going to support your platform. You can't have it. And then a lot of those devs will say, oh, is that so? Watch this. And then they create things like OpenRazer, which is a great example of that. So Razer is annoying, kind of a bit silly. In fact, not only do they not support Linux, they don't support Mac, which is kind of surprising, but they don't support Mac for their software. And it's just, At least they didn't ignore just Linux, but at the same time, very weird. Oh, earlier I mentioned Elgato. That's another one of those companies, but I forgot to tell you what the software was. So no, the Stream Deck support software does not work from Elgato, but if you go to the Flat Hub and get OpenDeck, Open DECK, then that will get you basically a plug and play. It detects it right out of the box. No issues. That's what I use. Works great. Also, if you have a Cam Link, it works perfectly in Linux. You don't need to do anything because they used universal protocols to make it work. So you don't have to do anything. Like there probably is some software for it, but if you just plug it in and then open it in OBS, it will find it. It works fine. I use it all the time. So there you go.
Your results and your mileage will vary. But like I said, we're using Bazzite today. So we're gonna set this up over here. Phil's gonna kind of walk me through it because I've never done it. And by him walking me through it, he's gonna be walking you through it.
I haven't done this in a bit. Okay, so the first thing you gotta do is obviously
Make it install media.
Yeah, we're gonna assume that you already have at least one working computer.
Or laptop.
Yeah, or something.
Or friend's computer. So what does immutable mean?
The OS is on its own separate partition that's read-only from the user standpoint.
So you can't mess it up.
Basically, immutable just means it's a lot more idiot-proof than your standard like Linux distribution where...
Because Linux is full power. Like most like Arch and all that, you can go in there and really mess things up.
Exactly.
That's Arch's whole philosophy is that...
that's Arch.
It's a build your own OS.
Yeah, exactly. Build your own piecemeal, like, you know what I mean? You get the installer, you install what packages you want, et cetera, et cetera. Bazzite is like, let's take an already established distro like Fedora, make it immutable so that it's a lot more difficult for the user to kind of mess up the OS. And then let's add all of the gaming specific packages that things like SteamOS and Valve have done.
Now, I want to step in real quick. A lot of people had negative things to say about it being an immutable because they're probably Linux power users, which is why you wouldn't want that. But this is, again, from the perspective of someone that maybe just built their first system, doesn't have Windows, doesn't want to buy Windows. You can get up in gaming with AAA titles like this for free.
Yep.
Now, there's free ways to get Windows, but this is obviously an anti-Windows type of video here. So it says right here.
Okay, so there's a lot to comment here. So this part might be a little long, but I'll try to go back and replay things if I need to. I hate to be the actually guy, but that's not really what an immutable system is. There's two different kinds of things that are called immutable. One is immutable and one isn't. So I'll try to explain that, but they described Bazzite fairly close to accurate, but Bazzite is not an immutable system. First, if you look at that screenshot, so let's go back to that screenshot they were showing, wherever it is. I'll get to it. Don't worry, I'll get to it somewhere. It's coming. There we go. Okay, so this screenshot right here, I want to point out something here. They're talking about the word immutable and what it means, and nowhere in this screenshot does it say the word immutable. Because the Bazzite team do not call it an immutable system, because it isn't. But before I explain what that term means, I just want to say it doesn't really matter. If you are new to Linux and you're interested in trying out Bazzite, just go for it. It doesn't matter if it's immutable or not or whatever. It just enjoy using it. Who cares? But if you want to know what it is, then let's answer Jay's question. What does immutable mean? The word immutable means it cannot be changed. As in, not that some of it can be changed, or so it cannot be changed. There's no customization, no ability to modify anything. 99% of distros or image-based systems that are referred to as being immutable are not. Bazzite, Fedora Silverblue, Bluefin, Fedora Kinoite, OpenSUSE Aeon, and others are referred to by some people as being immutable. And it doesn't really matter because there's not really a great word to describe what it is. There's not really a good term that actually explains it properly. So immutable has become sort of a stopgap kind of ad hoc style meaning. So it doesn't actually, it's not a correct definition of what the word means to what the system is, but people kind of use it that way. And the way they described it is kind of accurate to how people use it, but not really what it means. Because you can make changes that are not affected by updates. These changes are typically like files that you put on your user account or adding some apps or, that kind of thing. Not changes to the system itself, but it does let you change certain things, whereas an immutable system doesn't ever for anything. For example, Roku devices. For those who don't know, Roku's Roku OS is a Linux-based operating system, but you can't change anything inside the OS. Most people don't even know that it's Linux-based. It's designed to only be updated and modified by Roku. That is an immutable system. So, there's the differences. Now, again, it doesn't matter. Who really cares? I'm not going to interrupt the video to correct the use of the word immutable every single time. It does not matter to me. It doesn't matter that much at all. I'm just letting you know in case you see it somewhere. Might not be exactly what it means, because you might see people say, I'd sometimes say immutable-ish because it's kinda, but not really. And you might see someone say semi-immutable, and that's not really a great term either, because, then people were like, where do I get a mutable system? Anyway, there's really not a better term to use, so it is what it is. You might see other things calling it atomic, but that's more about how the system updates. We'll get to that in a second, I guess, but there's not a great word. So let's just say, Now let's talk about what Bazzite is. They did say, for the most part, they're correct. They said that the OS is on its own separate partition, and that is basically right. Bazzite has a file system separate from the user data. So you get a file system that is managed independently from where you store your files, like photos and videos and any additional applications you install and that sort of stuff. It's not really meant to be idiot-proof, though, as they said, because anyone can run any traditional Linux standard stuff, like a standard style distribution. And as long as they don't tinker with it and mess with the fundamental core components, it'll continue to work just fine. If you install like Linux Mint or Zorin or Ubuntu or even Fedora or whatever, as long as it works on your hardware, then it will continue to work. If you don't go digging into the system anyway. These kinds of systems, though, they like Bazzite, they don't offer the option to go digging into the system, which is still fine because most people don't want to do that anyway. But I just wanted to point out that as long as you don't try to mess with it and tinker with core components, you're probably going to be just fine. Now, the main purpose of these kinds of systems versus traditional distros is that the development is a lot cleaner and the update mechanism is cleaner. And there's a bunch of different benefits for both developers and users. It uses a method called atomic or transactional updates. And this means that the updates are applied only if all of the updates are successful and only applied during a reboot. There are many benefits to this approach. And I know some Windows users are not happy about the whole rebooting thing to get updates, but it is the best way to do it in certain styles. And there are many benefits to this approach, such as making it easier for the developers to make it in the first place. And for users, it offers support for rollbacks. So if something goes wrong, you can roll back to the previous version and be up and running in seconds. So that's pretty good. But okay, there's that. They said something about Arch. I wanted to go back to that because, I don't agree with that perspective of Arch. I mean, I do agree with the perspective of Arch, just not the applying Arch to Linux. Anyway, hold on.
More idiot-proof than your standard Linux distribution, where
because Linux is full power, most Arch and all that, you can go in there and really mess things up.
Okay, so you can mess things up in Arch, and Arch is specifically not meant to be used by most people. So it's important to remember that Arch is not the only Linux, because he's talking about Linux being full power. Arch is full power, but Linux isn't necessarily full power. Most people don't want to do that stuff, and as long as you don't, you're good to go. But I do want to point out something. The Arch team targets a specific user type, and it's listed on their own wiki. It's something so specific that it's just kind of like... Anyway, let me give you a second. I think it's 7. Yeah, here we go. All right, so there it is. Arch targets competent users who enjoy its do-it-yourself nature and who further exploit it to shape the system to fit their unique needs. So first of all, that's using terminology that I don't think really counts as beginner. It's people who are competent or exploiting the system. It's not beginner-friendly phrasing, in my opinion. Oh, and also, let's check out the About page. There's another piece there that I want to point out. So this part right here, it says that Arch describes itself, or the team describes it as a versatile and simple distribution designed to fit the needs of the competent Linux user. It is both powerful and easy to manage. See that whole easy, relatively speaking, easy, making it the ideal distro for servers and workstations. I would not put that on a server. Like, why would you want your server to constantly update all the time? You know, because Arch updates all the time. Anyway, not important. I also want to point out the whole simple part, because they actually have a definition of what they mean by simple. So here is the definition of what they mean. Arch Linux defines simplicity as without unnecessary additions or modifications. It ships software as released by the original developers upstream with minimal distribution-specific downstream changes. Okay, so their wiki explains their definition to more rather be like minimal. Structure of the system as being minimal rather than simple to use. So yeah, they should just say minimal, and then they wouldn't have to explain what they mean by the term. Now, all of that is not to bash Arch Linux. Arch is great for many people. It's just not great for most people, especially not for beginners. And the way that Jay was talking about it was kind of associating all of Linux to be like Arch. And Arch is certainly not the baseline for what Linux is. They are kind of comparing two polar opposite types of systems. Phil compared Bazzite to standard Linux distributions, and Jay said Linux is full power and jumped the shark right to Arch. Arch is full power, yes, but the standard Linux distros are not a build your own OS. Arch isn't the typical way Linux systems work. Ubuntu, Fedora, Linux Mint, Zorin, etc. Those are prepackaged systems that get you started quickly right out of the box. That's how typical Linux distros work. If you want a system that is easy to use and gets out of the way, there are a lot of those. Arch isn't one of them. That's not a bad thing. It just means that this comparison is kind of odd. You know, that's why I wanted to take a moment and explain the differences between the Arch, the comparison of how Jay was saying it. Not necessarily that Jay said he doesn't know that much about Linux and everything. I'm not saying this is as like a jab at Jay or anything. I just wanted to clarify that not all Linux is build your own OS. Not all Linux is full power. Some of them most certainly are. Arch most certainly is, but not everything. I just want people to be confused about this as in like Bazzite and Arch are the only options. If you're new to Linux and you want to get started, check out the description in this video, because I'll put a link to my playlist about getting started, and you can just skip all that stuff. I should have probably put that before the rest of that, but anyway, I'll just wrap up this whole section about Bazzite structure. Phil said that Bazzite is like taking Fedora, adding mutability to it. Well, Fedora Atomic Desktops already did that stuff. I mean, not immutable, as we already said, but immutable-ish, you know? Bazzite is more like taking the Fedora Atomic stuff and then adding the gaming and optimizations to that. You know, I'm just saying Fedora has both styles. Not really that important, but there are other options than just the universal blue stuff, you know. Oh, wait. Jay mentioned that some people don't like the kinds of systems like immutability, and that they said that there's like probably for power users that don't like it. There are some downsides to this kind of system, and they lack some flexibility, but for the most part, that doesn't really matter. But you know, most people don't want the flexibility that is available in like traditional distributions. But I guess I've spent enough time on this section. Let's just move on. If you want a dedicated video to this kind of stuff, let me know in the comments.
So it says right here, own games outside of Steam, Lutris, which is pre-installed, and other launchers can only run games from most game stores, but cleanly integrate them into Steam gaming mode.
Real quick, it says cannot only. That's kind of like a phrasing to some people might not see. Like sometimes I'm saying something and I'll put not, and then I'll mean to put not and then forget to type the word not or something like that. You know, this is kind of funny because some people will mess up typing it and it completely means something the opposite of what you're trying to say, or reading it and the exact same kind of thing. Are you reading the opposite? But it's just kind of funny because I do that in a typing sense all the time, where I'll type something and on a comment, and then I'll read it back and go, "Whoa, that should not say that should say not here," and then I have to edit it, and it says like edit tag. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but I just thought it's kind of funny.
Which includes EA App, Epic Games, GOG, itch.io, Rockstar, Ubisoft, your dad's old CDs, and more. So basically, it's like a one-stop gaming launcher OS type service, but you obviously have other things built into it, like you have your browser and a desktop, and you can stream from it and all that.
Yeah, I mean, Lutris is fantastic. It's a great way to run various different kinds of games. In fact, Lutris is also about game preservation, so they have a lot of cool stuff for like older games and that sort of stuff. It's a very cool project.
When we download Bazzite, you'll see the option for, if you click the button up there, so it starts with what hardware you're using.
Oh wait, what are the other hardwares? So desktop, home theater, PC, framework, desktop, handhelds, okay. Laptops, and then VMs, obviously. All right, so desktop, what is the vendor of your primary GPU? So we're gonna say AMD RX 4000 Plus. Oh, it even supports Arc. That's cool. Arc and NVIDIA. Steam OS, or what's GNOME?
GNOME is Fedora's default desktop environment. So the desktop environment is basically the user interface for the desktop mode.
So what do we have up here?
I have KDE up here.
Real quick, it was the default. Maybe when they did this, it was at the time. But with the last release of Fedora 42, KDE Plasma also became a top level option, or a top level edition. So there's now 2 options for which desktop you use, but the rest of it, yeah.
Just because I have a little bit more experience with it from SteamOS. This is the big one for basically if you want to run it as like a home theater PC, or by default on a handheld, Steam gaming mode is enabled.
So what you're referring to is, do you want Steam gaming mode? This will automatically log into game mode and only supports a single user.
Yeah.
Which is that like big picture?
Yeah, it is exactly big picture. It's actually, in fact, exactly how SteamOS handles it.
So I'm going to say no, because we still want this to be a full...
A desktop kind of computer in OS, yeah. So then you're just going to download the ISO. For Windows, I usually like to use Rufus for creating the USB.
Okay, so what about like motherboard drivers and like Wi-Fi adapter and chipsets and USB and all that stuff?
So that's the crazy thing about modern Linux, is that basically all of those drivers, all support for like most modern Ethernet and Wi-Fi controllers and Bluetooth controllers and stuff is all built into the OS.
But for the record, like the stigma has always been NVIDIA support in Linux is terrible. But at least for Bazzite and your 4080 and the games that you tried it on, it was pretty seamless.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple comments that I wanted to share before we move on. I don't really recommend Rufus for most people, because if you look at the screenshot, let's go back. Let's see. Look at this screenshot.
So then you're just going to download the...
Okay, so what about like motherboard?
This is a very non-beginner friendly type of thing. The defaults are typically okay, but it might be confusing and make it take longer. I recommend Fedora Media Writer. Let me see if I can just open it for you. Okay, so this is Fedora Media Writer. It is basically a super simple, you just tell it what ISO to use and what drive to use, and then it does everything else, and it doesn't ask you any more questions. It's just that simple. And it has support for Windows and Mac, as well as Linux. So if you want to run it in a Flatpak, you can do that as well. I'm not saying that Rufus is bad. Rufus is great, in fact. Rufus also gives you the ability to use like the persistence option. So you can use persistence with Rufus. And it also has, by the way, if you don't know what that means, and also all those settings look a little daunting, just use Fedora Media Writer. Makes it easier. But Rufus is good. I'm not saying don't use it if you like it. Enjoy.
Controllers and Bluetooth controllers and stuff is all built into the OS.
Yeah, it's all built in. Like pretty much not the OS, the kernel has it all built in typically. So there are some things you still need to juggle drivers for, but most of the time you don't anymore.
For Bazzite and your 4080 and the games that you tried it on, it was pretty seamless.
Yeah.
From a Windows experience.
I've heard anywhere from like a minus 15% to like 25% performance hit. Although I didn't really see that in the games I tested, which was like Cyberpunk and Control and a few other titles and stuff. But I haven't really
Yeah, you were seeing a couple of FPS difference.
Yeah. In fact, it's weird because even in Forza Horizon, I actually saw a gain in average FPS.
The stigma's changing finally.
Yeah. So I mean, it kind of just your mileage may vary depending on what game you're playing and like what architecture of NVIDIA card it is. As far as AMD is concerned, I've always heard that it's basically either a negligible performance difference or it's faster under Linux. Okay.
So that's pretty spot on, except for the NVIDIA support being terrible. But that thing, I guess it's a stigma that's happened because it's not the greatest thing ever. But to me, I think terrible suggests that you can't use it at all. And that's not the case. And like I said a long time ago, it was actually really good in terms of like better than AMD. Maybe not necessarily really good, but whatever. But AMD has crushed it, like I said. But, I guess it is true that NVIDIA has improved drastically over the years. And it also is important that the rest of this stuff, he was talking about like some people say like there's a performance hit, and then some people say there's a performance gain. It depends on what they're playing and their hardware and all that sort of stuff. But even NVIDIA's has greatly improved in recent years.
So our ISO is downloaded, so you're gonna go ahead and open Rufus.
Okay, so Rufus is open. Do we need to format our drive or anything?
Nope, it's going to nuke everything that's on that drive.
Okay, disk or ISO image, right?
Yep.
Please select.
So click the
that's
select.
gonna be the file, Bazzite, the ISO.
AMD, and then just go ahead and hit start. Okay, we'll be back once the USB stick is burnt, and then, burnt, jeez. Showing my age now.
It might burn it.
Once the USB stick is written, we'll be back, and then we will show you how to install it on the computer.
So now take it to...
Okay, I still call it burn sometimes. Uh-oh. I'm okay with it. I think it kind of works. I think it still sounds pretty cool though, you know?
To the system that we're gonna install Bazzite on.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, so now he's got the USB stick in the new computer, and...
So we're gonna go to BIOS and choose boot priorities to go to this, because this drive actually has a Windows OS on it.
Yeah.
So we need that nuked, and then obviously we are going to reinstall Bazzite over top of it. All right, so we want to make the boot option number 1 our Voyager, because that's we're using the Corsair Voyager stick. So if I just restart now, it should boot to that drive. Now, obviously, based on your OS, it's gonna probably look different, or not your OS, but your BIOS, it's gonna look different. So you're gonna have to kind of, if you don't know your BIOS very well, you're gonna have to look that up and figure out what works best.
But if you're building a brand new computer with nothing on the drive, then it'll just boot to the USB stick no matter what, yeah.
So
yes, you can also skip the boot order by pressing a function key, and I don't know which one it is because depending on your manufacturing hardware, it could be different. So it could be anywhere between like F2, F8, F9, F10, F11, or F12. You know, I don't even know what mine is, actually. I just hit a bunch of them and then it pops up and then I just choose which one I want. I probably should take the time to figure out which one it is, but that's like multiple boots and I don't care. I can tap it multiple times, whatever. But yeah, or you could just do what Jay did. That's also good too.
So let's see, install Bazzite.
Yep.
Or test the media and install. Should we?
No, I don't do it. Just extra time. Gotta live life on the edge.
So does that Bazzite 41 mean 4.1?
No, it's 41.
That many versions? Wow.
Remember how I said my first experience was in 2003 with Fedora 3?
Oh yeah.
It's Fedora 41 now, so.
So it's gonna look very hacker screeny. It's so going for the garbage file looking.
Oh, yeah.
Installation.
So, okay, real quick, Bazzite has not had that many releases. They've only had they've been around for like 4 years or so. So they've had a lot of releases, but it's not that many. The 41 associates to the fact that it's based on Fedora 41, although that does explain because they're using 41, which means this is a little while ago because 42 has been out for a few months now. So at least a couple months now. So you're now in a situation where there's a little bit of differences between what is available now into what they were using.
Destination, no disk selected. So I just select the disk.
I would set the time and date.
Oh.
Time zone Los Angeles first.
Now select my drive.
Yep.
So select a system, installation, destination. Okay, so boom.
Storage configuration, automatic, and then I would check that box that says free up space by removing or shrinking existing partitions because we want to nuke whatever else is on there.
So click free up space by removing and shrinking existing partitions.
If you're trying to wipe out what's ever there. So if you want to do a dual boot, this is not the solution.
And done.
Yep.
We don't want to preserve any of these partitions.
So
I
there's a
just delete
delete
them.
all button.
Yeah.
So do
Wham.
that,
Delete.
and then hit reclaim space. And then if you want, you can connect to your network right now. Doesn't really matter.
Probably no point to, right?
Yep. And then the user will be default Bazzite with the password of Bazzite.
Okay, so it looks like they're not changing the password and the username. So that is the default, Bazzite and Bazzite. And then you should change it. If you are planning to use Bazzite, you should customize the user and password in the installation. Don't use the defaults. It's not a great thing to do. They're probably doing it for like a demo purposes and they don't really care because they're not going to keep using the same installation. But yeah, don't do that.
And that's pretty much it as far as choices during install.
Hey, none of all those, we want to spy on new stuff?
Isn't that a bit refreshing?
Microsoft is no longer in the business of making OSs. The OS is nothing but a data mining tool.
Yeah, basically.
I'd love to know the real metrics on how much data Microsoft sells and how much money they make on the data versus the sales of Windows. Bet you they make more money on the sale of the data, which means they should just make Windows free at this point. So you're paying to be spied on.
Now it's
Yes, exactly. I mean, they give more and more reasons to switch away from Windows, every day, especially to the Windows recall thing. Man, that's just them admitting they want to track everything you do on your system. I guess thanks, Microsoft, for giving people one of the best reasons ever to get away from Windows, because that is just horrific. What a terrible idea. Whoever came up with the idea to do this and then took it to the executives, and then somehow the executives agreed with it, then paid for people to develop it, and then tested it, and then shipped it, and announced it. At what point did they think maybe people are not going to like this, of tracking everything they do and making screenshots of everything they do on their system? How did that never come up? It's such a terrible idea. It is mind-blowing. But on the bright side, more and more reason to use Linux.
So now it says reboot system.
Click reboot and then
Take the drive out. I mean, it should automatically change the boot loader, I think, to this now, right?
Yep.
So perform mock management. What's mock?
So this is for secure boot stuff. You can just hit continue boot.
It's a little bitty wheel. Updating cargs. What's a carg? I bet you're going to tell us.
I mean, I wasn't going to tell you because I wasn't going to bother, but you asked specifically, so that means kernel arguments, which is a component of the bootc tool, cargs anyway. And bootc is basically the tool that makes all of the immutable-ish stuff work. So there you go. You're welcome. You did ask for it.
One reboot and should be...
Was that like a selector?
That was the bootloader. So one of the cool things about Bazzite and Fedora Atomic desktops is that you always get the current version of the OS, and then when it does an update, it keeps the last version as well. So in case an update breaks, you can get in the bootloader and then...
Cool. All right, so password
That's that rollback stuff I was talking about earlier.
should be Bazzite. Oh, I like that background. That's cool. Okay, system fatal error, probably because we need internet. It does look very Windowsy so far.
Yeah.
Like enough to where you don't feel lost.
That's why I picked KDE, because GNOME is more Mac-like.
Connect to the internet. So Firefox is pre-installed. So this is application launcher. Oh, this is very Windowsy looking.
That's kind of why I chose KDE over GNOME. GNOME is a little bit more Mac-like, KDE is a little bit more Windows-like, and so if you're, used to a Windows experience, I would recommend KDE.
That works.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of doing it,
You can buy our merch. Our merch is Linux compatible.
Wow, you can't get away from the constant Steam updater even on Linux, huh?
Yep.
Okay, so at this point, you should by now know how to log into your Steam, so you're gonna do that. I'd like to use the Steam utility or the Steam app to log in, so I have to remember my password. So let's see, OBS Studio. Hey, look at that. If they support Mac, they better support Linux. Oh yeah, and it does where's my mouse? It gets all big. All right. Download on FlatHub. com.obsproject.studio.flatpakref. I'm assuming that's File Explorer. So downloads.
Oh, cool. Nice. Okay.
Wow, that was easy.
I was worried that it was actually not going to be that complicated, or it was going to be more complicated.
But what I'm doing is I'm just trying to see, without you showing me, can I navigate to something? Like, on Mac OS, I always feel lost. And I've used Mac for years. But, okay, that's cool. So, yeah, so a lot of Linux programs I would hope would just link you to the right place in the store.
So the Discover store is, Bazzite uses primarily a Flatpak style app install. So the Discover store is basically the repository for that. So usually if you're going to be searching for an app, you would check Discover first, and then, or if you do Google it and then you find out it's in Flatpak, then you're...
Okay, so here's everything installed here. Clearly you can see that.
Okay, so pretty much all that's right. I just wanted to make a few comments here because there has been some changes with Bazzite since Jay and Phil did this video. There's a lot of changes. In fact, the Discover store is no longer being the main store that you're using. But I do want to say real quick, I'm glad to see Jay's expectation of how something would work, was so seamless. He just did it how he normally would, and it worked fine. So that is great. But Bazzite has switched away from Discover to Bazaar. That's the new store's name. And I actually covered Bazaar on a recent episode of my weekly news podcast show, This Week in Linux. If you want to learn more about the store in general and how it works, you can check out the coverage I did there. I'll have it linked in the description. But real quick, Bazaar is, like they were saying, it is solely made for Flatpaks, and that's true. Actually, I talked with the Bazzite team somewhat frequently in general, but I can tell you they are working on a process to make it even easier to do than what Jay did. So they're trying to make it so that when you click the install button for the app in the FlatHub, that it just launches the page in Bazaar, so you can quickly install whatever it is that you're trying to get, rather than having to go to your downloads folder and then launching the file and all that sort of stuff, which is fantastic in my opinion. Because if they're trying to make it possible to just lower the barrier to entry and remove as many manual steps as possible, then better. Definitely do that. But Bazaar is a different store. It looks different. It works differently. But it is also not just replacing Discover. It replaces the GNOME store as well as being the universal choice for all of the Universal Blue stuff. So if you get Bluefin Aurora, it's available on all of them. So yeah, I think Bazaar is a pretty cool store. If you want to learn more about it, link in the description.
There's also themes. I'm assuming you could retheme and reskin.
Yeah, that stuff is all...
The stuff that's already installed that has updates that need to be done. So you can just auto-update it from here.
Yep.
Yeah, this looks exactly like I'm used to seeing. Okay, so that actually was very easy to get that. So far this looks very Windows-like. Now, big picture, obviously. So if we were to set this to big picture mode, which is what, right here? And where is it? Right here.
Yep.
So if you had select that setting that said single user, big picture, or Steam OS mode, this is what would boot. Like it would go through all the Bazzite stuff and then here. Yep. Like this is your OS at that point. Well, I don't care for big picture personally, but I just wanted to show people what that looked like.
Actually, I think it's a good point to point that out and like to show it and everything. But I think the real value of this feature of Bazzite anyway is for anyone who wants to create their own like set-top box gaming console or whatever. So if you have like a spare computer and we turn it into a living room gaming console with Bazzite booting into big picture mode directly like that, you're essentially setting up your own Steam machine, but really easily. So I think it's pretty cool. I also do not typically select that, but it is pretty cool to have that option.
Show me how to find the games that are compatible with Linux. Because right now, this is going to show me my whole library and stuff. But obviously, not all of these games are going to work with Linux.
The way Linux runs games is if it's a Windows game, it'll run through a compatibility layer called Proton, which is what Valve has developed for SteamOS and the Steam Deck to basically get support for Windows games without having the developers have to make a Linux native version. All of them will attempt to run via Proton, but...
Let's see what happens if I try and run this like super indie game.
Yeah, sure.
Real quick, Valve is not the only people. It's a collaborative effort. Codeweavers and the Wine developer team are all working together to make Proton. So Valve is awesome that they're funding the process, but I just want to give credit to the Codeweavers team and the Wine devs because there's more than just Valve involved. Not important. I just want to give them credit.
Curious. Now, while that's going, show me though where the store showed like the games that were like tested and...
I mean, not important to necessarily mention. I just wanted to. That's what I meant. It is important that they're doing it because it is awesome. Proton is awesome. But
anything that says it'll run great on Steam Deck is basically what you're looking for. Click the collections. Click create a new collection and then create dynamic collection. And then if you go to the Steam Deck thingy, you can do verified only, which is they verified it works on Steam Deck, verified playable, or verified playable and untested.
Let's see.
Yeah, let's just...
So this is interesting because they're having to go through this process of creating this collection thing, which is not a great thing. You have to build this collection each person has to individually build this. That seems very bad. But I tested it myself earlier, like a couple weeks ago, of trying to find out like on my own Steam thing. And you'll notice that there's a penguin at the top right here. So like the very top left of the Steam client, I noticed this myself a few weeks ago. That does nothing. Like nothing. If you turn on Proton for every game, which pretty much everybody does, and by default now going forward, if you install Steam for the first time, it will have that there. It'll have Proton on by default anyway. That means that button doesn't do anything, because the whole difference is between like a native build and a Windows game that you don't have the ability to run. But with Proton, it kind of just tries to run it anyway, so that it's very confused. They need to fix it so that button just creates a collection, or you already have the collection or whatever, and that way you can do it. But because right now you click it, it does absolutely nothing. There's no changes whatsoever that you'll see.
See what happens.
This is a very indie game.
Chances are it should just work as if it was Windows. Hey, look at that. It literally just worked. A completely untested game.
Yeah, it's working just fine.
A lot different from your last Linux experience, I'm guessing.
Oh my God.
So as you can see, if you stick to the Steam ecosystem, it's very seamless. So if you're wondering what we're talking about when we're talking about a compatibility layer and Proton and stuff, so obviously a Windows game is going to expect Windows things like DirectX and...
Is it emulating the environment?
It's not an emulation, it's a translation. So what it does is basically translates like DirectX to Vulkan, which is the Linux native graphics API and that sort of stuff. So the point I want to mention about the whole it's not emulation is that that's why the performance hit is so tiny and or sometimes even a performance gain.
Here's a true test. This game, the movies, is like 20 years old maybe? In fact, it's not even on the Steam store anymore. It's just because I have it. So let's see if this will run. Okay. Well, I don't know. Maybe.
Doesn't look like it ran. But just go back to that Proton thing. Proton is awesome. Proton basically makes games you never thought would work on Linux. It's crazy. But this actually reminds me of a conversation I had in the YouTube comments a few days ago. So he was talking about how it sometimes works better. And someone asked, how is it possible for Linux to outperform Windows running a Windows game? And well, Linux is absurdly more efficient than Windows, just from the jump. So adding a little bit of extra weight to do the Proton compatibility layer on top of Linux is still not as resource hungry as Windows. So that's pretty much how. Windows is just so resource hungry that Linux can have something sitting on top that's translating the stuff to run on Linux, and it runs sometimes better. Not always. Not every game is optimized through Proton or whatever, but sometimes they are just better on Linux, which is kind of hilarious that a Windows game runs worse on Windows.
It might be too old.
This one may not.
I saw like something over here.
Until I scrolled over it. Like so how do we now like force exit of a program?
Alt F4. Oh yeah, okay, so Alt F4 is still the same. Okay, cool.
Oh, by the way, that he's doing this 20-year-old game. I actually, probably like a couple months ago or something, I decided to try out one of these really old games I had. It was a game from 2008. And it was actually the first game I ever put on my Steam account. And this was before you could play games on Linux. So I was dual booting at the time. And it was also the only game on my Steam account for a very long time, because I switched to Linux and then forgot about it entirely and just ignored it because I couldn't play games. So by the time Steam comes around, and it comes around on Linux, I decided to try that game on Linux. It did not work back then, but now it does. It doesn't have the greatest thing. It doesn't exactly look how I remembered it looking, but it does technically work, and it does run the game, and you can play. It's Audio Surf was the name of the game, for those who are curious. So super old games can also work through Proton. Not great, but it does work. So I just thought that was a fun story.
Okay, so that one doesn't work. Okay, well, Locked Up is an indie game. The last major update was in 2021. Now, if you want to take the guesswork out of it, like you said, you can go to here, right? Linux stuffs, and then we can go to Steam Deck and verified and playable. Right, that'd probably be our best compatibility there, even though we've got the yellow. So now this will show us all the games that are like verified and playable.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to do all that. That shouldn't be necessary.
For Steam Deck, yeah.
For Steam Deck, which will translate over to Bazzite. All right, here we go. So the last one we just did was an unknown game locked up. It's just the last played today. Oh, there it goes. And that was an unknown. So just because it's not on the verified list doesn't mean it won't work. It just means obviously there's too many titles for them to have gone through and tested all of them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it plays just fine. Look at that. Yeah, it's working fine. Okay, now the other launchers.
Okay, so if you're going to be running stuff off of Epic or GOG or Amazon games, you're going to look for Heroic Games Launcher.
It's just called Heroic.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So download from
Yeah, it used to be called Heroics Games Launcher, and now it's just Heroic. Yeah.
FlatHub.
Yep.
Now this is going to translate those other launchers into this OS.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to log into each one.
Yeah, whichever one you wanna download from. So right now let's try Rocket League, which will be on the Epic Game Store. So
Go to library. Hey, there's Rocket League.
Cool.
So
Nice.
download. Nice. Oh no. Okay, wait. Alt F4. We fixed it.
yeah.
Okay.
By the way, Rocket League happens to be my main game, so not to brag, Champ 3. I've not got GC yet. For those who know what that means, it's kind of a shame, but I'm pretty good. Pretty good. Champ 3 is still pretty high tier. But yeah. For those who don't know what that means, don't worry about it.
Okay, so obviously we saw Steam works. It's very familiar layout, enough to where you don't feel lost if you're trying to move from Windows to this. Obviously with Heroic, we could do our other game launchers, and then you can use Lutris for like EA if you're playing EA games and such. Now we're talking about EA games and online gaming. That is where it's not all unicorns and rainbows, because there's a problem with anti-cheat.
Basically, all of the big AAA multiplayer games, unfortunately, are just going to be a no-go because of the
For the multiplayer aspect of it. If they have a single-player version, you can play, but
Yeah.
you can't play like Battlefield 2042 online.
Yeah.
They have an offline bot mode and stuff, but so many of these games are battle royales and online only.
If it relies on an anti-cheat where the anti-cheat developers have said no to Linux,
Because what about like easy anti-cheat?
Yeah.
Or EAC?
EAC is pretty much the big one, so
That does or does not work?
does not work.
Okay, that
So
Okay, so I'm just going to stop it right there. Not all AAA games are incompatible with Linux. Some are not. Some online competitive AAA games purposefully block Linux because of the anti-cheat stuff. That is true, but there are others that do not. Like Marvel Rivals, for example, specifically made it a point to support Linux, including patches and whatnot. So it's not correct to say that all of them won't work, or just because it has online multiplayer it won't work. That's not true either. It just depends on what kind of anti-cheat they do and all that sort of stuff. Also, Phil said that easy anti-cheat doesn't work on Linux. It does. It doesn't work at the kernel level necessarily, but it does work, especially in Proton games. So the reason why game companies break Linux support is that they want to run these anti-cheats at kernel level, and Linux doesn't allow that. I mean, technically, I guess it kind of does, but in the same way, it allows the user to have control of their system. So Linux gives the user control, not the system control against the user, so you can't install an anti-cheat in that level. I mean, you can technically, but the whole point of these tools is to lock you down from your computer, and you can't lock the user down from their computer on Linux. So those game companies just block Linux altogether. So it's actually a good thing that Linux doesn't let the companies lock you down. But, some people want to play the games, and I get it. But even if an anti-cheat runs at kernel level, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't support Linux, because Phil said that Easy Anti-Cheat doesn't support Linux, but it does. And Battleite also does. They both work on Linux at the user level, not at the kernel level. So if a game wants to implement them in that way, they can do that. And many have. And also, in fact, you can have those working on the Proton kernel and the Wine kernel and have those kind of benefits too. So in some ways, inside of Proton also makes it a good system for anti-cheat in that case. But again, some companies are just terrible. I mean, there's even some anti-cheats that are not even just kernel level anti-cheats. They take it way too far, like Riot Games Riot Games' Vanguard for League of Legends and Valorant is ridiculous. In my opinion, that thing is a straight up rootkit. And for those who don't know what that means, it means that basically it has control of your entire system for all the time, for any time, anything it wants to do. Because like Easy Anti-Cheat and BattlEye are kernel level on Windows, but they only run when the game runs. Vanguard from Riot Games runs at all times, regardless, giving itself full access to control your computer at all times. Like, it's just, no. I actually made a video about that topic. If you're interested in learning more, I'll have a link in the description.
Games like Apex, Battlefield, Destiny, Fortnite, GTA, League, Roblox, Rust, Rainbow Six, Valorant. Again, all the big AAA titles that are going to be multiplayer are...
So even though we just launched Rocket League, we wouldn't be able to play a match.
You could play a match on Rocket League. It doesn't use the easy anti-cheat.
You just listed Rocket League, though.
No, I said Rainbow Six.
Oh, they said Rocket.
And Roblox.
Okay, so he said League as in League of Legends, and he heard League, so Rocket League. Anyway, but yeah, not all of them.
And Rust. Yeah, so older games like Rocket League that don't use easy anti-cheat are going to work fine. But yeah, that's pretty much the biggest.
And you were saying it's not so much the fact that it doesn't work on Linux, it's just they don't want to take the time to really make it work.
That's the
or keep it updated for Linux.
That's the most frustrating thing is, yeah, like, because easy anti-cheat has Linux like binaries for their anti-cheat and stuff. It's just the game developers just, they see Linux and they're just like, there's 10 million configurations, blah, blah, blah. We don't want to support it, so we just say no.
So that's the real downside. This is perfect for like single player gaming and stuff, or non-competitive online games that require the anti-cheat software.
So it's okay. So it's not really about the game developers not wanting to support all the configurations, because with Steam, you're basically just supporting the Steam runtime and that's it. It doesn't really matter. And with the anti-cheat stuff, it's really just a kernel level thing. They just want to lock you down from your computer. That's what they want. And they don't want you to be able to do anything that they don't approve of. And because Linux is built in such a way that the user has control of their computer, and you cannot be locked down from your computer in Linux, it's like a no-go for them. They consider that not acceptable. So it's either you care about the control of your computer, or you use a Windows and in the kernel level anti-cheats and let them control your computer, is effectively what this is. So that's the comparison. That's the difference. For me, if the game does not want to support Linux for that reason, I'm okay with not playing that game because I don't want them to have ultimate control over my computer. That seems like a terrible idea to me. But that's just me. So anyway.
So just to kind of recap though, so it was, go to Bazzite, download the ISO, you downloaded Rufus, you created the ISO, we put it in over here, did a fresh install, all the drivers and stuff. You notice we didn't load a single driver. Everything worked on its own. The wireless, the keyboard, the mouse, the graphics card, everything, because you select all that when you're creating your installer. Once we're up and running, the only things we installed separately was the Heroic Games Launcher, and that was it. Everything else was, an OBS. I installed OBS just to see if that would work. Yep. But I gotta say, for a first, I would consider myself first time. I haven't used Linux in 14 years. And again, that was Ubuntu, which was not like a turnkey solution like this where you just play games. So I think if you're someone that's like, I want to mess around in Linux, I want to get my feet kind of like dip my toes in, but I don't want to be overwhelmed, I feel like Bazzite is a really good way to start. Now, to keep this video very...
Okay, so hold on a second. So there's a couple of things. Yes, I agree. Bazzite is a great way to start with Linux, because if you just want the system to get out of your way and work, do its thing, run games, all that, and as long as every app you need is compatible with Flatpaks, then your experience will be golden in Bazzite. Bazzite is very cool. But not everything works in Flatpaks, so it might not be perfect, but for most people, it probably will be. Now, I also wanted to point out something that Jay just said about his experience with Ubuntu 14 years ago. Earlier in the video, I talked about how Steam didn't exist on Linux at the time, and also the whole GNOME Unity desktop issue was, so him saying it wasn't turnkey, I mean, yeah, Steam client wasn't even on Linux at the time until like 2 years after that. So, it's not fair to compare Bazzite now to Ubuntu 14 years ago. That's just, I mean, Ubuntu is a lot more turnkey now than it was then. So it's just, I mean, technology moves so fast. Like 10 years is like a century of advancement. And this was 14 years. So yeah.
Authentic. The Bazzite team did reach out to me after we showed the video wall, but I did not respond to them other than to say, hey guys, thanks for welcoming me to the community. They did say if you have any problems or any issues, reach out to us. We can help you. But we didn't have any issue other than the installer like hanged for a second. But when we rebooted, it continued on. Yeah. So that was the only thing we experienced.
And who knows, that could be some weird, like, our BIOS is so out of date.
The BIOS is very out of date on this system. But yeah, and then as you can see, we were up and running as long as you know your logins to your stuff. So it was actually very simple. Now, I am very aware for all of you Linux elitists, which is so funny to say,
yeah,
that this...
Why is that funny to say? I mean, elitist in general is like, I mean, anyone being an elitist at the same, for any reason is always just pointless and not good in the first place. But why was it so funny? I'm just curious. Why is it so funny?
Is such
I have my theories.
A locked down, simplified version of what Linux can be. Linux can be as basic as this or as complex as you want to make it. That's what is an open source OS. That's what that's all about. And that's where, like you were saying with Arch and other kernels and other distros, how you build your own OS based on the things you want to, plug and play in there. And that,
if it's Arch and things like that, like, not all of them are like that.
And that's the thing. You can go from this to that, or you can add another drive or partition and have multiple distros that you can boot into. So if you want to start tinkering, this is a really good place to start, I think.
I mean, I think just the biggest positive is that, as you saw, there's just...
Okay, real quick. I wouldn't call this a thing for tinkering. I mean, we talked about that earlier. It's great for beginners. Absolutely great place to start for beginners. If someone wants to tinker, though, I wouldn't really recommend this, because the whole point of is of a system that's immutable-ish is to not tinker with it. So, there's that. I'd recommend starting with a virtual machine if you wanted to do some tinkering, because if you mess it up, you don't have to care. You can just rebuild it and make a new one. You can actually make a copy, once you build a virtual machine, make a copy of it, and then work on the rest of it. And once you mess it up, you just go back to that copy, and then do it again. That way you can learn if you want to. And that's a lot better, regardless of what system you're using. Whether you're using it in Windows and then playing around with a virtual machine, or using it Linux and then playing around with another virtual machine with Linux, that's a great way to tinker, because you don't have to worry about messing your system up. So,
no bloatware, there's no nagging, there's no like blah blah blah, like I mean, like, watch, if you go to...
It really makes me wish 3D Mark worked on here. I'd love to know what the...
I know, that's another one big thing that I notice is 3D Mark doesn't work. So if you go to...
I mean, other things work. 3D Mark is like a benchmarking system. There's Geekbench, which works. I think the Geekbench actually might only be Ubuntu based, but there's also OCCT, which recently came out for Linux. Although, to be fair, I think that this video was made before OCCT was made for Linux. So if you want to now, Jay and Phil, maybe OCCT is a good option to do the testing and benchmarking and all that sort of stuff.
The system settings. And then you go to, scroll down to, where's updates? Update software is by default manually. And if you click notification frequency, you can set it to never bother you ever about system updates if you don't ever want to.
Windows will never do that, because that's how they continue to update the way they steal your data.
Okay, so that's real. It's funny because, yes, Windows is terrible at that. But it's also important that you do not do that. Don't turn it to never. You can turn it to never if you want to, but if you're a beginner, you shouldn't do that, because first of all, Linux does not annoy you with notifications for updates all the time. It's not like Windows where you have to do an update and you can postpone it for 4 hours and that's it, and that stuff. Linux doesn't do that. So the amount of times Linux tells you to update is going to be very rare. You also can just ignore it and not do it and just wait until you feel like it. And so there's no reason to turn off the notifications. That's just a side point. You can, but there's no reason to.
Spyware. Yeah.
All right, well, time to go. Guys, I understand this was just a scratching the surface level of Linux. I prefaced that at the beginning of this video. And that's where I said, if you guys, I would love to know where you diehard power Linux users feel the next logical leap from Bazzite would be for somebody that wants to start playing around. So like I said, please list down below, if you're gonna comment, keep it constructive and keep it useful. Say what distro you recommend, why, and its average user difficulty rating would be.
Yep.
And when I say average user, I don't mean average Linux user, but like average just Windows user, because you gotta assume they're coming from an environment where this is all new. I like the fact that it's immutable though, because I can't go in there and break it. You know, like you can go into Windows registries and break everything.
Yeah.
All right guys, time to get on out of here. I hope you guys have enjoyed our first touch into Linux. I'm debating potentially throwing another drive in my system I just built and having it be just a Linux drive to screw around with at home. Honestly, I'm really thinking about that. While the graphics card out, now's
Do it, Jay.
the time to do it, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, all right guys, thanks for watching. Like I said, if you're gonna be constructive down below, put that information, it'd be very helpful to not only us, but anyone else looking at this, considering Linux for the first time.
Again, like I love the fact that you were just clicking random games in your Steam library of like, you know, who knows where it came from and like how old it was and stuff, and it was just working.
right.
Yeah, most
The
of
only one
it
that didn't work was the one that was from like 2003.
Yeah. And honestly, it might not even work on modern Windows either.
Yeah. All right guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
That is awesome because I mean the game work like most of the games working and all that sort of stuff. It is awesome. Proton is amazing, really. And anyway, I'm gonna end my reaction video by just answering the question or for the feedback that Jay was wanting in terms of like what are the options. First, I don't think that you really need to play around with other distros. If you find a good distro that you like, whatever it might be, whether it's Bazzite or something else, just enjoy it. It's fine, you know, you don't have to worry about that. It's not a requirement to distro hop to a bunch of different distributions or whatever. If you have one that works, just keep using it. It's, you know, no reason to jump if you don't want to. But on the other hand, if you are someone who wants to dig around and learn the platform, then all right, here's what I'd say. So let's talk about like, I'm going to give you a rating system that is more like beginner friendly, because that's kind of what Jay said at the end. So I would say that Ubuntu or something based on Ubuntu is a great starting point if you're wanting to try out other things, because it's not that hard at all and it's more traditional style distribution. So if you want to try those things out. As for requested rating, I guess I'd say that it's about 8.5 out of 10, you know, for like the beginner friendliness style rating scale. So like 10 would be super beginner friendly and the easiest possible thing that doesn't really exist on any operating system. But, you know, that's where I would say, you know, 10 would be. But then there's Fedora, which is almost as beginner friendly as Ubuntu, slightly less so. But I actually made a video about what to do after installing Fedora Linux to make it beginner friendly. So check that out in the description. Without my video, it's probably a 6.5 out of 10 on the beginner friendly scale. And then with my video, set it 8.4. So like 8.5 with Ubuntu, and then 8.4 with the Fedora and my video attached. It's a 0.1% less just because you have to run some commands in the terminal to get to that point. But since you have my video, it tells you what to run. So not that bad. Just a 0.1 off in that case. OpenSUSE of Tumbleweed is awesome. I love the rolling release aspect of it and also the rollback features that they offer for like the snapshots and stuff. But it's not that beginner friendly. Like from the jump, Fedora is a little bit more of a more beginner friendly. I'd say OpenSUSE of Tumbleweed maybe is like a 4.5, maybe a 5 out of 10. Tumbleweed is not bad, but it's not user friendly. There's a ton of distros, so let's just skip to the extreme sides. For like the most popular ones, you're not going to cover everything because there's too many for this video, and this video is probably already pretty long. Let me look at the recording time. Yeah, this video is pretty long. So let's just jump into the Arch side of things, right? So Arch Linux gets a 2 out of 10 on the beginner friendly scale. Anything based on Arch, like there are a lot of distributions that are kind of like Arch based, and they try to make it more beginner friendly. But there's no way to actually make it fully beginner friendly unless you do an immutable-ish style approach. And most of them don't do that. So I'd say that it would increase the user friendliness a little bit. So like something like CachyOS or EndeavourOS or something else that's similar might be like a 3.5 or a 4. But it won't make it super beginner friendly because there are still downsides of being an Arch base. And I might go into more details. If somebody wants more information about that, let me know in the comments. I might make it like a series of explaining these kinds of things or whatever. But let's move on to Gentoo Linux. Gentoo, and we might as well just put NixOS in the same because they're similar. They both get a 1 out of 10 each because they're not beginner friendly at all, nor do they want to be, you know. And then there's the infamous Linux from scratch. If you never heard of it, it's okay. You should not try it. It is not meant for almost anyone. It gets an emphatic 0 out of 10 for being the worst experience for beginners imaginable, and not being that great of an experience for like, you know, enthusiast even. Like, you have to be like, the whole Arch is a competent Linux user. You have to be more than competent to do Linux from scratch. You actually have to want to suffer because it takes a long time. It is the most manual thing you can do in Linux. Everything is manual. You have to type out every little tiny piece. And I don't recommend it. If you did want to do it in a virtual machine, not on a computer, because it would take forever and it'd be just, you could do it in steps on a virtual machine, like save your state and come back later and that sort of stuff. So if you want to do it, I guess you could do it that way, but I don't recommend it at all. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this reaction video was giving you some extra information about the Linux experience and that sort of stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to leave some comments. And hope you see you in the next video.